Thank you very much for inviting me here. I can't describe how happy I am for the pleasure it is. And Dr. Sudha Pai, Dr. Arun Kumar, and my other colleagues and the students. It's really a pleasure to be here and speak. Right. Now, I would delve a little bit on something I'm working on elsewhere. I'll not speak long. It's a very short note which I'll suggest for something else. And if there is a title, the title would have been Between Monetary Policy and Consolidation of Fiscal Policy, Costs for India's Real Economy and Code. That would be the title if this little talk in the short talk that's it. Now, we find in recent just a couple of months, October 29th, it came up, it surfaced, there is a rift between the government's two organs. One is the central government, the Ministry of Finance, and the other one is the RBI. RBI is not an elected body, but it is definitely a part of the government. Now, between the two, there came up a rift. When on October 29th, the fiscal policy consolidation package was announced. And in terms of that package, the Ministry of Finance, Sunanda, they announced that we are going to consolidate fiscal policy in a way that the deficit as a proportion of GDP is going to come down to something like 3% from the present level. So next year it will be 4.5%, following year 2%, and so on. And they did it. They did it also, there is, of course, we'll come to that later. There is a pressure. There is a pressure in the sense that elections are at the corner, and there is also a pressure in the sense that growth rate is really dropping continuously. So between these factors, I think it made him, it made him look a little bit alerted, but at the same time states that, look, we are going to tighten the system, we are going to consolidate the fiscal deficit, fiscal budget, and so on. Now, next day, there comes up the second quarterly monetary policy review of the RBI, and the RBI simply states put. It says nothing less than 8% rate of interest, which is the call rate, and the lending rate was as high as 10.5%. And the ministry, of course, expected very much that the RBI will come forward, given the fact that the growth rate is low. They thought, well, interest rate will be lower. In fact, interest rate was going up successively in the last 3 rounds. Not last 3 rounds, very recent months, over the last year rather. So on the whole, the story is the following, that between the two wings of the government, now we see a very clear rift. Very clear rift in the sense that the two are not agreeing with each other. Then, if the quote is a quote, the central bank, the Ministry of Finance, the finance minister was infuriated by this decline of the RBI to scale them up, and infuriated by the RBI's reluctance to cut the rate, which he expected. They were not expecting. As a measure to revamp the economy, the finance minister reacted sharply by stating publicly that if the government has to walk alone to face the challenge of growth, then we will walk alone. This is the statement. Now this is a statement, and let us see, how the whole thing wraps up, how the whole thing comes up, and whether, this claim can be fulfilled, etc., etc. So evidently, as I said, that the declines in GDP, number one, as well as the pressures, political pressures of having the election and just having a little bit of revival, all these things really made the finance ministry expect that RBI will come forward and RBI will reduce the rate of interest. And of course, they believe that that will work to revamp the economy, which is another question. Now, given this, let us see what all goes behind. What all goes behind? What is the backdrop? Now the backdrops are following. One is, it is believed that the central bank is not an elected body. Politically, it is not bound by the electoral politics or anything. Therefore, there is some kind of a belief, some kind of a notion that the central bank autonomy remains independent of what is the government. So the central bank is not bothered about political goals, the election, and so on. So this is independent of political pressures from the elected bodies in the economy, and therefore the autonomy of this, in this context, it permits some kind of a policy space to the central government, which however is totally indoctrinated by monetary principles, and therefore it thinks that it should do what is right for it, and what is right for it according to the central bank here and many other places is that after all, by monetarism, if there is inflation, then it is the primary goal of the central bank to control inflation. So inflation targeting becomes the central, the sole policy target of the central bank. So this is the background of the central bank's reluctance to jump in and save the economy and so on. Okay. If it has to save the economy in terms of its own conviction, it is inflation which has to be controlled. So it is repeatedly stating that we have to control the inflation. And then, then maybe growth will come, which is growth, look for growth. However, this kind of a notion that there is autonomy for the central bank, according to me, it is a completely failed notion. Because in an open economy, the central bank is never free of certain other factors which makes it pliable, which makes it do things which otherwise it wouldn't have done. To be concrete, to be specific, when it is an open economy, there are a few things happening, like capital markets have almost opened up for India, and like many other emerging economies, India is also bound by the desire or responsibility. The central bank is responsible for managing the exchange rate. Managing the exchange rate, keeping the capital account open, these two things put together bring a situation where suddenly inflows or outflows of money are happening, which is beyond the control of the central bank. Now, in this case, when foreign capital is coming to the foreign exchange market, then given that the exchange rate can move up and down, there is also the problem for this. Immediately, the central bank faces this responsibility that they have to manage it within a band or at a fixed rate. I'm talking generally about any central bank. Any central bank which is like one in a developing country. So the central bank has to manage the exchange rate in the face of unknown flows, not predictable flows of capital from outside. Then what does it do? It just enters the market, it either buys or sells the foreign exchange. It just, tries to neutralize the impact of exchange, impact of capital flows on the exchange rate. Okay. Then the exchange rate is managed, but then what happens is that the reserves are naturally automatically. I think in economic students, all of you are very familiar with this argument, but I'm just narrating in order to complete my story. The story goes like this, that foreign exchange reserves are therefore going up and down accordingly. Now, as the foreign exchange reserve goes up, it is high-powered money after all, it is the source of money supply, therefore money supply is bound to change, move up when reserves are going up. And then, immediately, the central bank has this notion, has this line of thinking, in terms of monetarism, that after all, it will increase prices. Quantity theory of money, pure and simple. So they immediately, they have to do something in order to control inflation. And one tool which is left to them is, of course, CRR and various other things, and along with it, interest rate. And therefore, this explains the reluctance of the central bank to reduce the rate of interest in a situation where foreign capital is coming and has already immediately maybe slightly tapered off. But on the whole, foreign capital has come to India, and that has led to some reserve accumulation like $3 billion today, a little less than that. And as a consequence, the central bank is very concerned about inflation targeting. So this is the story behind. And behind this story, there is also this argument, which is there in the literature, which most of you are familiar with, the impossible trilemma. The trilemma that if monetary policy, if you have to accept the situation where you manage the exchanges in the face of almost open capital account, then you cannot have a monetary policy which is independent of these forces. In other words, you lose the autonomy, the central bank loses the autonomy over monetary policy. Okay? So this is the story, this is the trilemma which Krugman and operate, I think, other people have talked about, like Tom Valley, etc. This is the story, this is the theory that after all it is nothing else than a Mandel-Fleming argument. In terms of Mandel-Fleming argument, if political solution works, you can make the exchanges flexible. Don't try to fix it. But in this case, neither India nor China nor many other countries, they can really let loose the exchange rate in the market. And therefore, they have to do something in order to manage it within a band. They can't let exchange rate shoot up like anything, and which will make the exports not tradable and so on. So on the whole, we all realize that there is a pressing need for the central bank to control to manage the exchange. So this is the story. This follows directly from very static Mandel-Fleming kind of an argument, but none of us nor the central bank will buy the argument, which comes as a policy conclusion of Mandel-Fleming, that therefore exchanges should be completely flexible. Floating rate is the best solution. Anyway, so this is one of the background. Now I think also one has to recognize the fact that when Mandel-Fleming theorem was developed, after all it is a static framework, but in the context of a system where where so many things are changing up and down, there is uncertainty. Exchange rates can move up and down, interest rates can move up and down, stock prices can move up and down, and so on. And so there is uncertainty. Now, in this situation of uncertainty, once again, if an economy like India or many other developing countries, if they open their doors, then they also have to be a little bit cautious, and that makes them pay some attention or put in terms of priority a goal that foreign exchange reserve is very important for them. Even though there is the dearth of grains, you don't use your foreign exchange. Reserve, that stock of reserve is very important for all these economies because very soon it may flow out. And we all know, we were discussing this in the morning, that a part of the foreign exchange reserve, in fact I was talking to somebody, that after all a part of the reserve is coming from FIRs, the short-term capital, and that can just fly out. You close your eyes and find that they are gone. So therefore, all these countries, many of these countries, are now very conscious, very keen to keep the reserve, especially since the Asian crisis. In fact, this leads to a situation where there is one more compulsion for the central bank, and which can be described as a quadrilemma. And somebody very beautifully has described it, Joshua Eisenman or something in a paper, that after all, you don't talk about a trilemma, you talk about a quadrilemma, where there are 4 reasons why all these things happen. Now then, we talk a little bit about India. I'll not take too long. Okay, then we talk about India. What is happening in India? In India, again, the track record tells us that interest rate of late has been rather high. It has successively gone up, and now it is 8%. The lending rate is 10.5% and so on. And on top of this, we find that, well, there is, if you observe carefully, we find that a few years back, interest rate was as low as 4.5%. This is after the this is after the global crisis. 2008-9 rate of interest was as low as 4.5%, and India could not put in as much money as China, but at least, it was trying to balance out by cutting down the CRR, reducing the rate of interest. So if we observe the kind of, path which RBI has been following in terms of monetary policy, we find that there has been ups and downs, and very often these ups and downs in terms of interest rate in particular is in response to what is happening in the capital account. What is happening in the capital? So in an open economy, my position is that in an open economy, a central bank can never be autonomous. Rather, it is bound by these constraints, and so that's it. In fact, if you talk about China in this context, you know that China after 2008 crisis, how much money it poured? Well, it amounted to 4 trillion RMB, or about 650 or some billion dollars. That was poured. The stimulus package which came in the case of China was huge, but today it cannot. Today it cannot because the amount of stimulus, with this great recession, the stimulus which has recently been announced by Chinese government is much less, more so because China is very concerned about the inflation. Once again, the same story repeats in various contexts and so on. So then we come back to the finance minister's statement that we'll walk it alone. Can we do it? Can they do it in the context of the changes in the fiscal balance which is coming up? Because after all, we see, independent of this fiscal consolidation, what they are doing, they are also, deficit financing is faster, and what they do is borrow a lot from the market. As they borrow from the market, the interest bill goes up. As the interest bill goes up, in the primary deficit, you find in the primary budget, what you find that things like defense cannot be cut down further. So what remains are capital expenditures by the government and social expenditure. So social sector expenditure as well as capital expenditure are bound to get squeezed as a consequence of the rise in rupee debt, rising interest bill of the government, which it is doing because of this very conservative policy of borrowing from the market in order to just reduce the size of the budget deficit. Now, this kind of a great consolidation plan, therefore, it has very many aspects, including the adverse distributional aspects in terms of social sector spending. So what is happening is that all these governments, particularly Indian governments, they are following some kind. Today they are talking about, we should cut down the stimulus package, we can't afford after all inflation. We are really following this, something which completely failed in Europe, which is the austerity plan of Europe, in Greece, in Portugal, in many other countries. They all know it is not working. But at the same time, they are trying to punish the countries which overspend and so on. So we are following the same thing. So therefore I can say that scheduling further reductions in fiscal deficit as a proportion of GDP, the official goal in India of reviving an ailing economy is because this heavily discarded austerity program carried out in Europe, which failed. They both dwell on price and financial stability as the main prop for this recovery, thus they rely on the mainstream logic of supply-side economics, while price stability remains central in the process. The lack of demand and unsold goods with unutilized capacity has no role in such theories as explanation. Just to conclude, continuing with an unquestioned faith on part of the RBI on central bank autonomy, which is illusory, and of the central government on austerity as fiscal discipline as a panacea for growth, therefore, let's not talk about distribution. Growth is not distribution, as we all know. As a panacea for growth can no longer be treated as a solution for the revival of the ailing economy and alleviation of misery for large numbers who are suffered. Therefore, this kind of shifting the responsibility on each other, it simply means that those who are in power, they do not care about the revival of the economy growth. They are quite happy as long as it grows, if corporate sector is doing well. Thank you.